Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, which forms part of our management series for 2023. I'm Sarah Charlton, one of DG Legal's management and compliance consultants. For those of you who haven't joined a DG Legal webinar before, the slides and the recording from today's presentation will be sent over tomorrow. We are in webinar mode, so unfortunately I won't be able to see or hear any of you. Please use the Q&A function if you have any questions. Alternatively, use the chat function for anything else, and feel free to pop something in as we're going along. You don't need to actually wait for a specific slide or anything like that. The training should last no more than about 20 to 25 minutes, and that's just to ensure that there is time to be able to answer any questions that you might have, as we appreciate that this is the main advantage of attending a live session today. So welcome. So during episode 3 of our 2023 management series, we considered the change curve. And today's session is going to set the scene on why change is important before delving in deeper to the practicalities of managing the people aspect to this. I'll of course provide a quick refresher on the change curve for those who didn't attend episode 3, or for those of you who may simply need a reminder. This session also draws on some of the other topics that we have previously discussed within the management series, such as communication and culture. Before we begin, let's just remind ourselves of what change is. So in essence, it's the process of moving from one state to another state. And the reason why the people aspect of change can be difficult is that it tends to disturb something that people are comfortable with. So we are creatures of comfort and routine. I thought this was quite an interesting quote from Peter Senge of the MIT Sloan School of Management. I thought this was quite apt for a law firm, as my experience is very much that the owners tend to be very content on change being rolled out and implemented within their business, as long as it doesn't affect them, and then there is a process that they can bypass. So I thought that was an interesting take on change and how people approach it. So many of you will have been in business for a number of years and may well remember life before digitalization. I remember the old ledger cards and the paper folders that we used to have. Things moved much slower back then, and largely due to the operational challenges that were presented in introducing change. Digitalization was an early event that increased the pace and appetite for change. This hasn't altered over the years. Events continue to influence the pace of change, and that's either by increasing or decreasing the pace of change. We have stakeholders wanting more sustainable operating models. So we talk about greenwashing and environmental and sustainable needs. We've got geopolitical conditions to consider, as well as the more obvious events such as Brexit, the pandemic, and obviously we are in the current economic climate, very difficult operating climate. Some of these events will have stimulated an increase for change. So the pandemic probably accelerated for some people to move over to electronic case management systems from paper, and some will have stifled change. So for instance, there wasn't an awful lot of legislation change while Brexit was going on, because businesses were obviously trying to grapple with how they're going to trade outside of the UK and within Europe after Brexit. So where do you stand as a firm? So businesses generally have different appetites for change, and these can broadly be put into 3 categories. So the very first category is one where a business looks to avoid or delay making changes. Obviously, other businesses are going to naturally overtake you. The second category is one where you only make changes that are necessary. So an example of that, for instance, if you do property work, is the land registry had moved over some applications onto their digital portal, and they were going to cease doing paper applications. So you would have to have moved over it. Some businesses that were more forward thinking just decided to move over maybe through the trial phases, or when the message came out to sort of say you've got a year and a half to move over. And then other businesses would have waited until the 11th hour before being forced into that change. Then finally, you do have the category of innovation, and that's generally industry leaders within that particular sector. So I do want to have a little bit of audience participation. So can you just take a couple of minutes out into the chat box and just pop in the firm that you work for? Which one do you think best describes it? Do you think they sort of avoid or delay change? Do you think that they only do change that's necessary? Or would you sort of say that they are forward thinking? So if you are brave enough, just maybe pop in the chat box your thoughts on the type of business that you work for, and then we'll have a look at that just before I move on to the next slide. Just gives me a flavour of the type of businesses that you potentially work in. I would also like to follow this up by sharing with you a recent ACCA report, and that included a thought-provoking statement which highlights standing still is still a conscious decision that you make, because you are making a decision to let other people pass you by. And in turn, it exposes the business to strategic risk. Interestingly, the ACCA also highlighted the fact that a change-enabled culture goes hand in hand with innovation and creativity. So it's really important that you do look to manage change as best as you can. And as we've indicated, the people aspect is significant. So we're just going to have I'm just going to have a quick look at the chats and have a look to see what everyone. Oh, there's a lot of just only as necessary. Well, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to whet your appetite for change within this session. Okay, so moving over to a final thought. This is, so if you're not still convinced of the risks attributed to avoiding change, then I'll leave you with this final thought and maybe something that you can share with your colleagues that maybe will nudge them over from necessity over to innovation. I was recently at a legal practice management Tiger session where we were discussing AI, and one of the panelists, Caden Smith, he quoted this during the session, and I just really did think that that encapsulates the risk to law firms who might fall behind, and it highlights the fact that, you know, AI is not going to take a lawyer's job. It's potentially going to be the lawyers that are using AI that are more likely to take the lawyer's job. So I think that's definitely a motivation for change if you haven't already had one. So we're going to have a look at the change curve, and we are going to just recall the fact of how the change curve came about. It was as a result of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was a Swiss-American psychiatrist specializing in personal transition through grief and bereavement. So that's how the change curve started off its life. So she came up with a model that reflected the denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, and then obviously the acceptance of the loss. And that was adapted over the years, and it's now widely used within business and change management. And how good or bad you deal with each stage is likely to influence the time it takes for someone to pass through the change curve. And it's important for people to pass through as quick as possible, because it means that your business will go back to normal, and obviously the productivity will be there. And then you can start to also look at the next set of changes. As a business, as a manager, is ultimately about managing feelings and expectations. And those people with a high level of emotional intelligence are likely to fare better at this than those with a low emotional intelligence. So we're going to have just a quick look at what EI is, because not everyone will be familiar with this particular term. But it does sit in a backdrop of how well you can manage people through change. So emotional intelligence can be split into four main characteristics. Very few people possess all of these or a lot of these. But those that do have these qualities in abundance do tend to be more successful in roles which involve managing people. Firms can use assessments to work out where individual strengths lie. The results of this could be used to make a more informed choice on selecting the individual you need for the task at hand. So you could also use the results to create the basis of a management and leadership mentoring program. So if you found somebody that had a strong level of self-awareness, but perhaps they didn't have very good relationship management, you could pair those two people up. And hopefully with them working together and collaborating on things, they will pick up hints and tips on behaviors and approaches and qualities from each other that will allow you to start to have managers or leaders that have a more rounded approach towards people. Upskilling yourself in some of these qualities can obviously make it easier for you to interact effectively and harmoniously with other people. And this is often described as rapport. You'll get the slides, so you don't have to worry about remembering it all. So just touching on rapport, because whilst rapport, there's an element of it being used as a tool to build relationships, it's also the foundation, really, of being better placed to influence, learn, and teach other people. It can often build trust with others. And when people see that you are trusted by someone that they hold in high regard, that's more likely to instill trust that they will then again have with you. And then create opportunities to collaborate together, which is something you're going to want people to do. You want everyone to work together as a team and not be working in opposite directions, because again, that reduces your productivity. There was research that shows we do have a tendency to actually recruit people like ourselves, and mirroring and matching our techniques for building rapport or making yourself more like the other person. So I remember working in a law firm, and you know, when they went through the recruitment process of the new receptionist, you could pretty much pick who was going to get the job, because they had a type that they were often looking for. And then in addition to that, one of the sort of role models that I had when I was first started in management, he was able to connect to any type of person. So no matter who they were, whether they were a trainee solicitor, what age group they were, what interests they had, he was always able to pick something out and have that connection with them and be able to sort of relate to their, you know, problems or their celebrations, and had a very good memory in relation to, you know, the names of their pets or their kids or their spouses and partners and so forth. So they're very good techniques if you know, if they are things that you can build. So skillful leaders will likely to be very, very good at this naturally. That's not to say that you can't train yourself on it. Like I said, you can you know, be mentored by someone to build those traits up that you might be lacking in emotional intelligence. There is quite a significant downside to hiring people that are similar to you, and it's something we might look at in the 2024 management series, because I think we're going to look at teams and how to build sort of successful teams and the qualities of teams. But having people that are identical to you is often not a good idea. So let's have a look at how this translates into real life, because it's all well and good looking at theories, looking at charts and that sort of stuff, but what does that actually mean from an interaction perspective? So we're going to reflect on some of these characteristics as we break down the change curve into the various different stages. But do have a think about the things that you're strong at. So it might be a case that you're quite ambitious. You might be, you know, you might be the driving force within the business, but it also might mean that you're perhaps, you know, resistant to change unless it's come from you. It might be a case that you can be stubborn and slow to respond to something that you don't quite like. So what you're ideally looking at is trying to, you know, have the qualities all, you know, across the right-hand side, and having less of the qualities on the left-hand side. And again, one of the things that you can do to try and reflect on that a little bit is do a 360-degree review to sort of find out what the staff feel, because although you feel that you're a good listener, if the rest of the business don't feel you're a good listener, then you're not a good listener. It's really more about how you're perceived by others rather than how you perceive yourself. So that's quite an important tool that you can use to reflect and improve on your own abilities and your own qualities and characteristics. So the first stage of change is the shock. So you want to be able to consider the order in which you might want to communicate, because the change might not affect the whole business. It may affect one team more than another. So prioritize those who are likely to be impacted the most first. You could also look at using multiple methods. So for instance, the people that it's really going to impact, you do face-to-face, and then maybe some of the others you might want to do through a newsletter, or you might want to do through the intranet and so forth. Some businesses do have regular conferences where they map out the change, map out, the vision that the owners have and the direction of travel from a strategy perspective. So there can often be a number of options on how you're going to be able to communicate that. There's going to be difficult conversations to be had. So it is important that you remain compassionate and obviously understand the emotional wave that they're likely to experience if they weren't expecting this change at all. Depending on their level of shock, they may not remember everything that you have said during that meeting. So you should consider following this up, maybe using a letter or a document that they can take away with them to read and digest, or a second meeting to answer all of the questions that they're probably going to have once they've gone home and thought about it, or even possibly both. So some groups may protest or actively resist the change and want to force things back to how they were. And this stage is the period where the most damage is likely to occur within the team. If other members of team have accepted it, then they will continue to attempt to reverse it. And we're going to expand on that a little bit more. You may see behavior of protesting, refusing, sabotage, long-term absences, resignations, and so forth within that stage. Some people will just have mild, irritation that they're used to something and it's changed, but it's not going to affect them that much. Some people actually might have bouts of heightened anger. I've seen it before where, someone's been told of a piece of change that they really haven't liked, and they've thrown furniture around and had to be escorted out of the building. So the type of person and the characteristics that you have when you have somebody at a frustration stage, you obviously don't, meeting anger with anger, it's obviously going to be a recipe for disaster. So you need to focus on de-escalating the situation and not fanning those flames of frustration. If you feel a conversation is getting out of control, then you should stop it and reschedule it. Don't carry on to try and labor your point. If you feel that someone's getting angrier and angrier and you're not able to meet the business objective of de-escalating it, then you need to take that to another point in time when you're both in better headspaces to pick that conversation up. Then we've got the moment where you might feel quite low because you start to realize that the reality is that, it's going to happen. And part of that is the healing process. They're likely to experience a lot of negative emotions such as fear, regret, guilt, especially if they've been sabotaging the business. Hopefully there's not that many people that fall into that category. They may be disengaged and withdrawn. If you're unable to move them past this stage, then it's highly likely they will leave the business anyway. But a hurdle you might face is where they remain in the team and have the power and negative influence over others. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Don't show your frustration. Try not to be critical or hard to please at this point, because even if you deep down, you don't have any sympathy for them anymore, because you have given them a number of opportunities to, get on board with a change. Any meetings need to be very well planned, as they're, anyone who's in this particular headspace, they're going to hang on to any negative comments that you inadvertently say. So planning and preparation is key at this point. Your objective here is to remove your emotion state and ensure that you achieve the best results for the business. So don't get drawn into their emotion and reacting to their emotions. So one of the stages is experimenting, where you sort of come round to the idea that you've accepted that change is going to happen. You've gone through the low mood, and now you've sort of started to think, well, maybe I'll sort of dip my toe in and have a look. Culture's going to play a big part to this stage. So you might find that there's resistance to the experiment, not because individuals are actually adverse to it, but because they don't want to go against others in the team who are adverse to it. And that is a real problem. And if you feel that that might be the case, it's something you want to fix before you start implementing change, because implementing change when you've got a rotten apple in the team, that's only going to exacerbate it. It's not going to make it go away, or it doesn't often make it better. And like I said, we will talk about that in a few more minutes. So again, this stage dovetails into the firm's culture. You need to avoid trying to be demanding, bossy, confrontational. Again, your patience is going to start to, run out, especially if it's been happening over months. You're going to be like, I've given you these opportunities. I just want you to get on board. But you need to show patience and resilience. You need to be creating an environment where it's effortless to become accepting of something that you previously rejected. So you've got to make sure that they feel comfortable, that although they might poo-pooed it right at the beginning, that if they then have a change of heart and just, because they have done some exploring, that actually it could work and the end result could be a lot better, they should be able to be comfortable to change their decision, change their view. I will share with you, there is no illusions that managing people, the people aspect of change, is an emotional journey, and it can be exhausting, and but hopefully it can be a worthwhile one that, if you successfully embed it into the business, it's something that you'll feel very proud of. So when you're thinking of the change curve, you have to remember everyone's different. So how we process each stage is different. Some people are going to go through it in a nanosecond. Some people are going to take weeks. Some people take months. Some people don't ever come through it. It'll all depend on how much time we spend at each stage and what value we place, especially on the end result, and what else we have going on in our lives. If we already have a lot of change going on in our lives, this may be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and the time is the timing rather than how you've handled that particular change and how much change we're familiar with. So in the business that I work in, we have change all the time. So change isn't an unfamiliar commodity in the business, and there's a better appetite perhaps to consider it. So this popular phrase, one bad apple can spoil the bunch, is used to refer to a situation when you do have one person's negative demeanour or bad behaviour that can affect the whole group of people, influencing them to have similar negative attitudes or to engage in the same bad behaviour. So although they may feel that the changes you're putting in are positive, if the person of influence sort of says that it's a bad thing, then even regardless of what they think, they're going to follow. Interestingly, it can also work the other way. So if you do have somebody that has a very positive demeanour and good behaviour, then that can rub off to the other group as well. So I did some research on this topic a long time ago, and I read an article about a professor who completed an exercise to demonstrate such a point. And they monitored the behaviour of different people in different groups, and it confirmed that people would often change their own values and behaviours in order to fit into the group that they're in. This is more prevalent with staff who are just starting out in their career. Those that are more well established in their career tend to keep their values. So if they rate compliance, for instance, or ethical decisions particularly high, or environmental issues, and the firm they work for don't hold those same high standards, they're just likely to move and go to another law firm rather than change their own values. But that's more people that have had a longer career in their workplace. So something I get asked a lot is, how do you get that one person on board with the rest of the team? Everyone has that one person who's going to rebel or resist. So I would say that you have to be very good at painting the picture. You have to let them visualize the results, understand what motivates that individual. So for some people, it's money, sometimes it's status, sometimes it's praise. Team I work for, they love a good party. So whatever it is that motivates either the individual or the team, then have a think about drawing on that and then putting that incentive in place. And you may feel that you don't need to, or you shouldn't have to, but you might find that by putting that incentive in place, it's going to save you money in the long run, because the whole team is going to be more productive a lot quicker than they would if you've got a number of people in the team stuck at a specific junction. When you're communicating the change, even if it's someone who's generally negative, you need to be excited and motivated in your communication style, Focus on what the results are going to look like and how it's going to benefit them as an individual. Everyone wants to know, they might not say it. They might be like, oh, I'm only saying it for the team. They want to know what they're going to get out of it. Don't give up getting them on board. So stop at as many points as you possibly can to invite them back onto the journey. That will also hold you in high regard to the rest of the team for the fact that you are giving them a number of opportunities to get on that bus. It's not a case that the bus is leaving, get on, or you don't, or you're off for the whole journey. You're giving them opportunities to be able to reconsider again, reconsider their choices. So influencers aren't just for celebrities. You will have some within your business. The technical term, I guess, is leaders, but I just thought influencers just sounded better, more modern. These are rarely managers. Ideally, you'd have managers that are leaders as well, but it doesn't go hand in hand. But somebody who's going to influence is somebody that the staff are going to follow and they're going to listen to. So it's important that you're able to identify them. And don't be afraid to make use of their attributes in influencing people in your business and assisting you with delivering the change. Bring them on board. Don't alienate or resist straight off. You could make them a change champion, for instance, or give them a role that requires them to be a responsible communicator. So they can't go around dissing the firm, saying mean things about the change. They're going to have to demonstrate that they're on board. Understand what motivates them and consider offering them something that is likely to fulfill that need. So like I said, for some people, it is a job title or a status. So, sell it to them as a promotion that they're going to be a change champion, or give them £1,000, whatever it is that's going to motivate them. Book them on a course, make them feel valued and fulfilled in whatever need that is that motivates them. I tend to find in relation to communication, quite often it's the person who's communicating is the problem rather than the recipient or what's actually said sometimes. So your communication style is going to play a big part on how you manage people through this change process. And we discussed in an earlier episode how your emotions can influence your message. But also how someone might interpret that message. And we don't just use words to communicate. There are always messages that our body emits that we are communicating. And sometimes we're not conscious of how our body is emitting those messages. So whenever you're having a difficult conversation, you have to be in a good headspace for it. If you're not, then it's not going to end well. So the words I could be using are happy words and buzzwords, because I've spent a lot of time planning what I was going to say. But if my body language sort of says I'm really frustrated, I've got no sympathy for you, and I'm actually angry because you're creating more work for me, then the message isn't going to be, believed. And then obviously it's not going to be trusted. So having some level of self-awareness on how you communicate, will obviously make sure that you have control of that conversation and get the result that you're hoping for. So just sort of briefly, some of the pitfalls to avoid: make sure you do have enough time. We tend to leave communication to the last minute. We don't necessarily think long and hard about how it's worded, but do take that time, because it can be a huge investment on the success of your project. Don't put yourself under pressure to respond immediately. So if someone is pushing back, or you do have someone that's difficult, that rotten apple in there, don't just react. At the end of the day, take a day to think about it. You can use a holding phrase of, I'll get back to you by the close of tomorrow, or I like to liaise with other members of the team, or ask them for a piece of data to sort of back up what they're saying. But be very careful on how you use your tone. And if you feel it's better, then pick up the phone or see them face to face, so they can see that you're not being confrontational with how you're saying it. But we all react differently to different ways of communicating. Some people will read an email and just take it as fact, and then other people will have a level of emotion when they're reading an email. So just be mindful of someone's emotional state. So despite being 1 minute over, I would just sort of say the conclusion really is that there is no silver bullet. We are different, but planning and preparation for the people aspect is as important as the planning and preparation for the project itself. If you do have any questions at all, or I'll still be on for the next minute or two. If anybody does have any questions that you'd like to ask, then feel free. Alternatively, have an amazing afternoon. And thank you very much for taking the 30 minutes out of your day to listen to me.